Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer. I'm with the City of Los Angeles Emergency Management Department. Since June of 2023, 39 buses have arrived in the City of Los Angeles sent by the state of Texas. And we've got the least amount of buses out of any major city that's received them. Philadelphia is relatively similar to us, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Denver, New York City. In every single one of these cities, the emergency management departments, or their local equivalents, have been the ones in charge of the response to these buses. And I'll tell you, that's not something they prepped me for 11 years ago when I graduated with my master's degree. I did not think asylum seeker buses would be one of my responsibilities. This has been a novel circumstance for emergency management, but we were able to pull out old plans. We used some of the repatriation plans from Hurricane Katrina to help figure out what we were doing with these responses. But we were working with entirely new partners. We very purposefully never have pictures of the asylum seekers on the buses, but many of them are etched in my mind because there was an emergency manager at every single one of these buses as they arrived. I remember the woman who's 39 weeks pregnant who just spent over 24 hours on a bus with sketchy air conditioning and sketchy food situations to get to Los Angeles. I remember the man who walked down the stairs, carefully stepped to the side, and fell instantly to his knees with his arms in the air, praying and thanking God for actually making it after a long journey. And one of the ones who stays in my heart is a 10-year-old girl who sat next to me and explained how excited she was that she was no longer in a tent in Mexico getting flooded every time it rained, and how she wanted to be a lawyer. These are the politically complicated, ethically challenging situations that modern emergency managers are facing. My boss likes to say that we are now the everything management department. Whatever problem the rest of government isn't quite sure how to solve winds up on our desks. And so I'm going to talk about some of the ways that the research I learned here at the University of Delaware has helped impact me as I look forward, and the challenges that we're facing that desperately need more research. So let's start with this story. 2019, 2 a.m. A wildfire starts burning in Los Angeles, and I am awoken and asked to send some emergency alerts. Those alerts, I had not yet been formally trained in LA's system. I was there less than 4 months. Luckily, I had some disaster training in alerting. I'd read a lot of the research from Milletti, from Sutton. I knew the effects of milling in wildfire evacuation, and I was able to craft an effective enough alert to get people moving. And this is how I knew it was effective enough. Can't see it because the text's a little bit small. These are tweets by LeBron James and Arnold Schwarzenegger explaining how they are evacuating from the wildfire. Yeah, pretty much the most LA experience possible for having a response to a disaster. So that is a way that the tools I had gained from research, from a lot of active study to figure out what kinds of effective ways should we message during emergencies can come into practice every day. It was an incredibly helpful way for me to use that research. Here's another example of research impacting my life. This LA Times headline, "The riskiest place for a natural disaster in the US, you're living in it, Los Angeles." Now, I'm sure some of you are sitting in a seat wincing right now. This is a national risk index, and it is used in all sorts of very interesting ways. One of the recent ones, and my apologies to my colleague from FEMA, didn't realize I'd be going right after and saying this, but the Community Disaster Resilience Zone program came out recently, which used the National Disaster Risk Index and the Social Vulnerability Index to determine areas that were most at risk. We were a little puzzled in LA City when we opened that up and found the one designated location in the city of LA is the downtown Civic Center corridor that has all of the government buildings and approximately 2 apartment buildings. Cheapest rent, $2,500 a month for a studio. So not necessarily the kind of neighborhood you would picture to be most at risk. And there is a ton of background I do not have as to why those specific indices were chosen for this specific project. But I think it's an excellent example of the work that researchers do gets applied in ways that may not be anticipated, and our knowledge of how those systems work and what underpin them can have broad implications, both for the researchers who create the indices, the practitioners who start using them, and the policymakers who make major decisions based off of them. Real funds, real money is going into how these decisions were made. Now, I'm not saying that LA doesn't have a lot of risk. In the 5 years I've been with LA, we have had 9 declared states of emergency. 5 of those are in the last 2 years. So we have had storms, wildfires, civil unrest, pandemic, obviously, and a couple other weird ones because it's LA. But this has kept us busy. The other thing that's kept us busy is emerging technology that we are still figuring out exactly how we are going to be using. Earthquake early warning. This is one of those things that has been in development for years. I remember sitting here and studying what was happening in Japan with earthquake early warning, and it is now implemented and live in the state of California. The implications of that implementation are still very much trickling out. So, looking at the alerts delivered to people, we have not yet had a major earthquake early warning alert go to a large population of people for a damaging earthquake in California. We just don't know how the California audience is going to react to that alert. There's been studies, there's been attempts to look at it, but until it really happens, what a car does on a freeway, what a person does in a crowded theater or in a mall, or at a major sporting event, we're just not entirely certain what those reactions are going to be. So first of all, get yourself ready for that research, because it's going to be intense the first time it happens. But secondly, that is one of those questions that I get to start implementing. The technology, it's out there, it's live. How are we communicating these preparedness actions with the public? But here's a more interesting one for me, for our researchers, which is the machine-to-machine actions. I purposefully chose this graphic from USGS. It's a great graphic. But machine-to-machine sort of implies no humans need to be involved, which has a couple of problems with it. If you look at old headlines, you will see that the city of Los Angeles has implemented opening fire station doors for earthquake early warning as one of the early pilots. Gonna break some bad news to you, almost all of those systems are turned off right now. Why? Because in the fire stations, they're like, you do know, most of the time, no one is in the fire station. They are out on calls. The last thing we want to have happen after an earthquake is our fire station doors open for everyone to wander in and help themselves. And honestly, firefighters are pretty good at getting into places, so they're able to get those station doors up if they really need to. That's one of their skills. So as we look at machine-to-machine actions, the human implications of how these systems actually roll out are still emerging, and still an area that needs a lot of focus. Another piece of technology that's happening, and that matches incredibly well with the 2 conversations that went before me, are the wildfire landscape, which is rapidly changing and evolving. This is AI modeling of wildfire spread using supercomputers from UC San Diego that is actively being used in the state of California to do wildfire evacuations, figure out where wildfire fighting resources are going, to determine what alert areas are being sent. It models, based on current weather and the dryness of fuels, exactly where the wildfire is likely to go in the next 3 hours. This technology is coming directly into collision with a collapsing insurance market of wildfires. My own mother has already gotten her denial letter of not being able to renew her insurance this year, and we went out there trimming her trees to try to get it overturned. And that is happening throughout the state. It is almost impossible to insure if you're anywhere near a high-risk area for wildfire. That is making the residents deeply uninterested in seeing how their neighborhoods are going to burn down. I was at a workshop literally last weekend with UCLA researchers who had a wildfire spread model as part of their presentation that they pulled out because the homeowners that were going to be coming were so resistant to anything that appeared to increase the risk that insurers wouldn't cover their homes. Even though we sort of broke it to them, the insurers already know. They're well aware that the wildfire threat is high. But these perceived risks and how they're butting heads with each other and what it's going to do to our landscape of wildfire response and awareness in the state of California, it's emerging as we speak. Now, this is what happens when you take a group of emergency managers and let them poke at things. This is a Waymo self-driving car. They are completely self-driving taxi-type cars. You order it like you order an Uber, and they are live in Phoenix, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. You can get one today. And they have so many weird implications, so many strange things happening. So one of my favorites is one that one of these police officers actually pointed out. Usually, if you have a heart attack while you're driving, you will either, unfortunately, get into a crash, and that will happen pretty quickly, or the driver of the vehicle will notice something's wrong with you. In these Waymo vehicles, you enter, you sit down, they take a look, make sure there was a human that entered the car, then they turn off all the cameras, and they do not monitor you until you get out. There's a panic button in there, but somebody could be on a 45-minute drive, have a heart attack 5 minutes in, unless another driver happens to notice the person slumped in the back seat. No one's going to know for 40 minutes. It's a totally different landscape of how these kinds of risks happen. There are really interesting questions about what happens when cell phone connectivity goes down, because these are very, very dependent on the connectivity to data networks. They will, safely stop. And then you've got bricks throughout the city during a time in which, right now, it may be 20 or 30. In the next 5 years, hundreds, thousands, no ability to actually move anytime there's a major power outage or cell phone outage. Could get very interesting. There are also opportunities. What if we can send some of these self-driving vehicles into hazardous areas where we would rather not send first responders to help evacuate people out, right? There are opportunities and challenges here, and this technology is coming whether we like it or not. It's already moving, and so we get the opportunity to catch up and figure out how we're going to use it. I did my master's thesis on a lawsuit that the city of Los Angeles faced about disability, access, and functional needs related issues. My good news for the grad students is the city of Los Angeles still hired me after that. I was as shocked as all of you are, but one of the things I tell students every day is, in your studies, focus on the things that are worrying and freaking out emergency management departments, because those are the things that they want to hire people to be able to help them address. And here's my cheat sheet of what they are right now for us in LA City. This is the press conference of Mayor Karen Bass declaring a state of emergency for people experiencing homelessness in the city of Los Angeles. Homelessness and its impacts on every element of disaster response is one of the growing trends in emergency management. Language access is another one. How are we translating messaging for all sorts of different people who need to receive that message? Climate change, I think we've already heard addressed in a lot of different ways, but how those climate impacts actually hit the city local residents is one that you may have heard of in LA. We got 12 inches of rain in one storm in Los Angeles City. That is our usual annual rain rate. So it caused an incredible number of impacts. And extreme heat is the other one that I would point out right now are major issues that we're being asked to. And I'll go ahead and throw cybersecurity in there too. Emergency management has to answer to every single one of these. They're issues that we're asked to look at. And then finally, the looming issue for the city of LA. This is the issue that every single training and exercise we do for the next 4 years is about. In 2026, we are hosting the World Cup, including the first US-based game. In 2027, the city of Inglewood, I gotta give them proper credit or else they'll yell at me, is hosting the Super Bowl, but that has major impacts on the city of LA. And then comes 2028, the Olympics and the Paralympics. For every single one of these, we are already engaged in planning efforts. And part of the disaster management world's job is to look at what happens when you're bringing people around the world to an earthquake zone, wildfire zone, extreme heat zone. What things do we need to do to prepare those communities, populations to communicate effectively and to make sure that the people of Los Angeles have the tools and resources we need as all of these international guests come in? It's an incredibly challenging environment. I am so thrilled I have the background in research and all of you here to help me look at it as we go forward, because the cool thing about mega events is they are labs in the growth of emergency management. You can see what happens through various stages of disaster. You know it's coming. Now, we certainly hope every single one of these special events goes off without a hitch, but we know that a lot of the different partners that have to work together in major disaster response also come together for mega events. So that is what I will leave you with today. I'm so happy to be back here. Thanks for having me.